What if I told you Vikings never wore horned helmets? Lady Godiva probably never rode naked. Napoleon wasn't short. Romans didn't throw up during dinner parties, and Columbus did not prove the earth was round. Sounds crazy, right? These are stories almost everyone believes. They're in movies, in cartoons, in school books, even in advertisements. But here's the truth. Most of these famous facts are complete myths. Today, we're breaking down 5 of the biggest history lies ever told and how they fooled the world for centuries. And trust me, some of these will completely change how you see history. Let's begin. When you picture a Viking, what do you see? A tall warrior standing on the deck of a wooden longship, cold wind blowing, big beard, braided hair, fur cloak, massive axe in hand, and of course, a metal helmet with giant curved horns sticking out on both sides. That image feels so real. You've seen it in cartoons, in video games, in Halloween costumes, in sports team logos, in Hollywood movies. It looks powerful, dramatic, savage, intimidating. But here's the truth. There is zero archaeological evidence that Vikings ever wore horned helmets in battle. Not one. Thousands of Viking Age artifacts have been discovered across Scandinavia, England, Ireland, and parts of Eastern Europe. Weapons, shields, axes, swords, armor fragments, even entire ships like the famous Oseberg discovered in Norway. But not a single authentic Viking battle helmet with horns. In fact, only one nearly complete Viking helmet has ever been found, the German Boo helmet in Norway. And guess what? No horns. Real Viking helmets were practical. They were made of iron, rounded to deflect blows, sometimes with a nose guard for extra protection. They were built for survival, not for fashion. Now let's think about it logically. Imagine you're in close combat, shields crashing, axes swinging, swords clashing. Would you want 2 giant horns sticking out of your head? Those horns would give your enemy something to grab and pull you down, make your head heavier and throw off your balance, get stuck in shields during combat, make you a bigger target. In real battle, that would be a disaster. Vikings were skilled warriors. They built advanced ships. They navigated oceans. They traded across continents. They were not foolish enough to design impractical helmets for war. So where did the horns come from? The answer takes us to the 1800s. In the 19th century, Europe experienced a wave of romantic nationalism. Artists, writers, and composers became obsessed with heroic pasts and ancient legends. One of the biggest influences was the German composer Richard Wagner. In his famous opera cycle, Der Ring der Nibelungen, which was inspired by Norse mythology, costume designers wanted the characters to look larger than life, more dramatic, more mythical, more fierce. So they added horned helmets. Not because it was historically accurate, but because it looked amazing on stage. Under bright theater lights, horns made the warriors look intimidating and unforgettable. The audience loved it. Artists began painting Vikings with horns, book illustrators copied the look. Later, early filmmakers and costume designers followed the same dramatic style. By the time Hollywood got involved, the horned Viking was already deeply embedded in popular culture. And once an image becomes popular, it spreads fast. It becomes truth in the public mind, even though historians and archaeologists have repeatedly said, no horns. Interestingly, horned helmets did exist in ancient Europe, but from much earlier Bronze Age cultures, thousands of years before the Viking Age. They were likely ceremonial or religious, not battle gear. Somehow, over time, different historical periods got mixed together, and the Viking paid the price. Today, if you remove the horns, many people feel something is missing. That's how powerful imagery can be.
The Horned Viking is one of the most successful historical myths ever created. It proves something important. Sometimes what looks the most ancient is actually the most modern invention. And historically, the Horned Viking helmet is pure fiction, a 19th century costume design that conquered the world.
If you're already surprised, hit the like button right now. It helps this video reach more people who still believe these myths. And subscribe if you love uncovering hidden truths in history. Now, let's move to a legend even more dramatic. The Lady Godiva legend. In 11th century England, there was a real noblewoman named Godiva. She lived during the Anglo-Saxon period before the Norman conquest of 1066. She was married to Leofric, the powerful Earl of Mercia, one of the most influential men in England at the time. This was not a small village situation. Mercia was a major kingdom. Coventry was growing as an important town. Taxes were heavy, and life for ordinary people was hard. Now here's where the legend begins. According to the famous story, Lady Godiva felt deep sympathy for the struggling townspeople of Coventry. She repeatedly begged her husband to reduce the harsh taxes he was imposing. Leofric, tired of her requests, supposedly responded with sarcasm, "I will lower the taxes when you ride naked through the streets of Coventry." He believed it was an impossible challenge, but according to the legend, Lady Godiva shocked everyone. She agreed. She removed her clothing, mounted a horse, and rode through the town, covered only by her long flowing hair. Before the ride, she supposedly asked the townspeople to stay indoors, close their doors, and shut their windows out of respect. Everyone obeyed. Everyone, except one man, a tailor, later known as Peeping Tom, secretly drilled a hole in his window shutters to watch her pass. And as the story goes, he was instantly struck blind as punishment for his disrespect. It's dramatic. It's emotional. It feels heroic, a woman sacrificing her dignity to protect the poor. But here's the problem. There is absolutely no contemporary evidence that this nude ride ever happened. None. No official record, no monastery chronicle, no tax document mentioning a dramatic protest, and medieval writers loved recording shocking events. The first written version of this story didn't appear until the 13th century, nearly 200 years after Lady Godiva's death. That's a massive gap. In history, that's a red flag. The Peeping Tom detail? That came even later, added centuries afterward to make the story more moral and theatrical. So what do historians actually know? Lady Godiva was real. She appears in official land charters. She donated generously to religious institutions. She and her husband founded and supported monasteries, including one in Coventry. She was wealthy, powerful, influential, but there is no evidence she ever rode naked through the streets. Some historians believe the story may have been symbolic. In medieval times, acts of public humility, like walking barefoot, were sometimes performed as religious devotion. It's possible that a symbolic gesture was exaggerated over time into a nude ride. Others believe the story was simply created by later writers who wanted to craft a powerful moral tale about compassion and justice. And once the story existed, artists embraced it. Painters in the 18th and 19th centuries loved the dramatic image, a beautiful woman on horseback, long hair flowing, representing sacrifice and virtue. Victorian-era poets romanticized it. The story became legend. It became culture. So powerful that centuries later, a luxury chocolate company adopted her image. The logo of Godiva features a woman on horseback, inspired directly by this legend.
Songs were written, statues were built, festivals were held in Coventry celebrating her, all built around a story that likely never happened. And this is what makes the Lady Godiva legend so fascinating. It shows how history can transform. A real woman, a real town, a real time of heavy taxation, but wrapped in a dramatic narrative created long after her death. It's not that Lady Godiva wasn't compassionate, it's that the naked ride is probably symbolic storytelling, not documented history. A myth powerful enough to outlive the truth. And that's the danger and beauty of legend.
The Napoleon height myth. Napoleon was extremely short, about 5 feet 2 inches. Tiny, hot-tempered, overcompensating. The definition of a short man complex. In fact, psychologists even use the phrase Napoleon complex to describe an aggressive attitude supposedly caused by being short. But here's the truth. Napoleon was recorded at 5 feet 2 inches, but not in British inches, in French inches. And this is where history gets messy. In the early 1800s, France and Britain used different systems of measurement. A French inch, called a pouce, was longer than a British inch. So when British writers saw 5 feet 2 inches, they assumed it meant British measurement. It didn't. When historians convert his height correctly from French units to modern imperial measurement, Napoleon was about 5 feet 6 or 5 feet 7 inches tall. That was completely normal for a Frenchman in the early 19th century. In fact, the average male height in France at that time was around 5 feet 5 inches. So Napoleon wasn't unusually short. He was average, possibly slightly above average. So how did this myth spread so widely? Two powerful forces, politics and optics. First, British propaganda. During the Napoleonic Wars, Britain and France were bitter enemies, and wars are not fought only on battlefields, they're also fought in newspapers and cartoons. British cartoonists loved mocking Napoleon. They drew him as tiny, childlike, standing on stools, having tantrums, looking ridiculous next to tall British soldiers. It was psychological warfare. If you can make your enemy look small and foolish, you weaken his image. And those cartoons were wildly popular. Over time, the image stuck. Second, the Imperial Guard. Napoleon often surrounded himself with elite soldiers known as the Imperial Guard. These men had strict height requirements. Many were over 6 feet tall, which was extremely tall for that era. Imagine standing next to a group of giants every day. Anyone would look small by comparison. So when foreign observers saw Napoleon with his guard, they assumed he was short. But it was all relative. There's also another small detail people overlook. Napoleon's nickname among his troops was Le Petit Caporal, which translates to the Little Corporal. But this wasn't about his height. It was a term of affection. It meant he was close to his soldiers, one of them, not distant like other rulers. But English speakers misunderstood it, and once again, language confusion helped fuel the myth. Now here's the irony. Napoleon later played a key role in promoting and spreading the metric system in France. The metric system was designed to eliminate confusion in measurement, to create one clear, standardized system. Meters, kilograms, liters. Simple, consistent, logical. And yet, despite helping standardize measurements, Napoleon himself became a victim of measurement confusion. A unit conversion error turned into one of the most famous personality myths in history. Today, the idea that he was extremely short is so widespread that many people are shocked to learn the truth. And this tells us something powerful. If propaganda is repeated enough, if images are shared enough, if jokes are told enough, they can override facts. Even for over 200 years. Napoleon conquered much of Europe. He reshaped laws, governments, and military strategy. But one of the only things many people remember about him today is a myth about his height. And it all started with inches. The Roman Vomitorium myth. You've probably heard this disturbing story. Ancient Romans loved luxury. They would lie on couches at huge banquets, tables overflowing with roasted meats, exotic birds, seafood, wine poured endlessly. They would feast for hours, eat until they couldn't move. Then, according to the myth, they would excuse themselves to a special room called a vomitorium, stick their fingers down their throats, throw up, and return to continue eating. It sounds shocking. It sounds decadent. It sounds like the ultimate symbol of Roman excess, and that's exactly why the story survives. But here's the truth. It's completely wrong. The word vomitorium does come from Latin. It comes from the verb vomere, meaning to spew forth, but it had nothing to do with vomiting food. It referred to architecture. In massive Roman arenas, like the famous Colosseum, tens of thousands of people gathered for gladiator fights, public events, and spectacles. Managing crowds that large was a serious engineering challenge, so Roman architects designed wide passageways built into the stadium structure. These passageways allowed thousands of spectators to enter and exit quickly and efficiently. When an event ended, the crowd would pour out of the exits in huge waves. From above, it looked like the building was spewing forth people. That's where the term came from. A vomitorium was simply a stadium exit corridor. That's it. No secret vomiting rooms, no banquet purging chambers, just advanced crowd control engineering. And Roman engineering was incredibly sophisticated. The Colosseum alone could hold around 50,000 spectators. Some estimates go even higher. It had numbered entrances, assigned seating, and a carefully planned system that allowed the entire arena to empty in minutes. Modern stadiums still use similar design principles today. In fact, if you've ever left a football stadium through a large tunnel-like exit, you've experienced the modern version of a Roman vomitorium. So how did the gross myth begin? The confusion started much later, centuries after the Roman Empire fell. Writers in the 18th and 19th centuries began romanticizing ancient Rome. At the same time, there was a growing fascination with Roman decadence, wild parties, extreme luxury, moral corruption. The idea that Romans were so obsessed with pleasure that they would vomit just to keep eating fit perfectly into that narrative. And because the word vomitorium sounds like vomit, people assumed that's what it meant. Language tricked us. Add in a few exaggerated historical accounts of wealthy Romans overeating at banquets, which did happen occasionally, just like in any wealthy society, and the myth became irresistible. It's important to understand something. Yes, some elite Romans held extravagant feasts. Yes, overeating existed, but there is no historical evidence that special architectural rooms were built for vomiting. None. The idea of a permanent, dedicated vomit room in Roman houses is pure fiction. And yet today, if you ask many people what a vomitorium is, they'll confidently describe a disgusting dining practice, all because of a misunderstood Latin word. This myth teaches an important lesson. Sometimes history isn't distorted by dramatic lies. Sometimes it's distorted by translation. A single word, misread, misinterpreted, repeated for centuries, and suddenly an architectural exit becomes a symbol of gluttony. In reality, the vomitorium wasn't about indulgence, it was about efficiency. Roman engineering was ahead of its time, but instead of remembering their architectural brilliance, we remember a story about throwing up, and that's the power of a good but false narrative. Columbus and the flat earth. Here's one almost everyone learned in school. In 1492, Columbus sailed west to prove the earth was round.
At the time, people supposedly believed the Earth was flat. Sail too far and your ship would fall off the edge. But brave Columbus challenged the ignorant world and proved them wrong. It's dramatic, it's heroic. It sounds like science defeating superstition. But it's not true. By the time Columbus sailed in 1492, educated people in Europe already knew the Earth was round. In fact, humans have known the Earth was spherical for over 2,000 years. As far back as ancient Greece, philosophers observed that ships disappear hull first over the horizon. During lunar eclipses, the Earth casts a round shadow on the moon. Different stars are visible in different parts of the world. All of this pointed to one conclusion: the Earth is a sphere. By around 240 BC, the Greek mathematician Eratosthenes did something incredible. Using simple geometry, shadows, and measurements between two cities in Egypt, he calculated the Earth's circumference, and he was astonishingly accurate, only off by a small percentage compared to modern measurements. That was nearly 1,700 years before Columbus. During the Middle Ages, educated Europeans, especially scholars and church officials, continued to teach that the Earth was spherical. Medieval universities used textbooks based on Greek and Roman knowledge. The idea that everyone thought the Earth was flat in 1492 is simply wrong. So what was the real argument? It wasn't about shape, it was about size. Columbus believed the Earth was smaller than most scholars calculated. He underestimated its circumference. He also overestimated how far Asia extended eastward. When he did his math, he concluded that sailing west from Europe would quickly reach Asia, especially Japan and China. Other experts disagreed. They believed the journey would be far longer, too long for ships to survive with the supplies available at the time. And they were right. Columbus's math was wrong. If the Americas had not been there, his ships likely would have run out of food and water long before reaching Asia. He didn't prove the Earth was round. He gambled on incorrect calculations, and he got incredibly lucky. There just happened to be two massive continents between Europe and Asia. And here's another twist that makes the story even more interesting. Columbus wasn't even the first European to reach North America. Centuries earlier, around the year 1000, Norse explorers led by Leif Erikson reached what is now Newfoundland, Canada. Archaeological evidence at L'Anse aux Meadows confirms this Norse settlement. So Columbus didn't discover America in the absolute sense either. He initiated sustained European contact and colonization, which had enormous global consequences. But he was not the first human, nor even the first European, to set foot there. So where did the flat Earth story come from? The myth became popular in the 18th and 19th centuries. Writers wanted to portray the Middle Ages as a time of ignorance and superstition, often called the Dark Ages. By exaggerating the ignorance of the past, modern thinkers could present themselves as enlightened and progressive. In 1828, American writer Washington Irving published a highly romanticized biography of Columbus. In it, he dramatized debates between Columbus and church officials who supposedly believed in a flat Earth. It made for great storytelling, but it wasn't historically accurate. And once the story entered school textbooks, it spread worldwide. Today, many people still believe Columbus stood alone against a flat Earth society. In reality, the debate was about distance, not shape. Columbus didn't prove the Earth was round. He proved that sometimes being wrong in the right direction can still change the world. And once again, we see how history gets simplified. A complex disagreement about mathematics becomes a heroic battle between science and ignorance. It's cleaner, it's easier to teach, but it's not the full truth. And that's the pattern with so many historical myths. The real story is often more complicated and far more fascinating.
Why do these myths survive? Now, here's the bigger question. Why do these myths last for centuries? Because myths are powerful. They're dramatic, emotional, easy to remember. Artists exaggerate, poets romanticize, political enemies mock. Language evolves and gets misunderstood. And over time, the story becomes stronger than the truth. The Viking horns look cooler. The naked protest sounds braver. The tiny dictator seems more dramatic. The vomiting Romans feel more outrageous. The flat earth story sounds heroic. Truth is often less dramatic, but it's far more fascinating. History is not just about memorizing dates. It's about questioning stories. It's about asking, who created this version? When was it written? What evidence exists? Who benefits from this narrative? Because sometimes the biggest lies aren't told on purpose. They just grow over time. And once they enter movies, textbooks, and pop culture, they become almost impossible to remove. But now you know better. If this video changed the way you see history, subscribe right now for more mind-blowing truths. Comment below, which myth shocked you the most? And share this with someone who still thinks Vikings wore horned helmets, because history deserves the truth. See you in the next deep dive.